there was a woman who said the issue that she started working with in my workshop online was overeating. So then she does this process and she suddenly realizes my great-grandparents were part of that famine, Ireland. And of course, they gave instructions genetically to their kids, epigenetically, to overeat because that's life. And that's a really important reframe of that idea of trauma. I really believe that these epigenetic instructions, these are not traumatic damage. These are love from our ancestors. Our ancestors only have one way they can communicate with us and keep us alive, and that is this epigenetic information. And what it prioritizes above everything else is, here's how you stay alive. And if we're in a safe place now where we don't need to eat, or we don't need to fight everyone who comes to the door, then we can heal that. But we don't have to be angry at them for this beautiful information that they sent us.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good day. This is Conor, and Callum is away today, but I have the absolute pleasure of hosting a very special guest today with our Unplugged podcast number 70. This is our 70th podcast. So today, joining us all the way from New Zealand, from Auckland, is Mr. Richard Bolstad. Welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you very much, Conor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolute pleasure and honor to have you here today. I'll share with the world a little bit about you. Richard is a New Zealand-based NLP trainer, psychotherapist, and co-founder of Transformations International Consulting and Training with over four decades of experience in the field of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. He is the author of numerous influential books, including Transforming Communication, Resolve, A New Model of Therapy, and The Structure of Personality, which integrates NLP with systems thinking, trauma resolution. In fact, this is one area that I'd like to unpack with you today, the immense amount of work you've done with trauma and NLP, and transpersonal psychology. Richard is widely recognized for expanding NLP beyond technique into ecological, systemic, and spiritually informed models of human change. Did you know that?
That sounds pretty good.
Pretty good resume, Richard. Absolute pleasure to be here. Richard and I met way back in 2008 at the University of Sydney, and from the other side of the ditch, I've been a fan. I've often looked on your website, read some of the articles that you've written. I really like the way you document and bring a high level of credibility to the skills and the change that you apply and use with NLP. But before we sort of delve into the juicy stuff, could you? I mean, 4 years. We had Shelley Rose Charvet on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and or last week, and in that conversation, Shelley said that she completed NLP trainers training with you way back in the early 80s. So you've been in this field for a long time. Tell me, you're from New Zealand.
Yep.
I mean, how on earth did you end up learning NLP in New Zealand?
Okay, well, that's a good story. Just to be fair, it wasn't quite the early 80s. It was more like the early 90s, the start of the 90s.
Oh, okay.
We trained together.
Okay.
I'd been I was introduced to NLP in some trainings I was doing in Australia back in the 80s. Terry McClendon was the person who first brought NLP to New Zealand. And so he was one of the original co-founders of NLP, really. And after I'd trained with him, I was really impressed with it. At the time, I had training as a psychotherapist. I had a qualification as a nurse, registered nurse, psychiatric in general, and I was a trained teacher as well. So I was looking for something kind of pretty robust, and I decided eventually then to shift over to training with Tad James in Hawaii. So my original training after that, my master practitioner training was with Tad James, and then Shelley and I and several other people actually who became close friends connected after the trainer training in Canada. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. So you have you studied to be a teacher back in NZ?
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked as a teacher in the Polytechnic and sometimes university system here in New Zealand. I
What were you teaching?
Yeah. Well, I was teaching nurses and I was teaching teachers, and the main subject I was teaching was actually communication skills. And so that's how I got into NLP. I was really, really skeptical about NLP at first, of course,
Mhm.
and it's just that everything that I learned kept working, and so I
Yeah.
thought I'd first of all learn it so I would be able to more effectively argue against it. It's a very mismatching kind of idea. And it just convinced me, so
So you would, I mean, and this is a broad generalization, but you would have had quite an analytical mind coming from a teaching background where everything
yeah.
was evidence based, I would imagine, to a
Right.
degree. And then looking at NLP, where maybe the robust evidence base that it is now maybe wasn't established back then.
That's right.
So it was sort of like, well, this can't be real. This can't be this. You can't change people so quickly. And then what, you experienced it, and then all of a sudden you went, huh, okay,
That's it.
maybe I can. Hey there, this is Connor and Callum from Connekt Coaching. Hope you are enjoying the Unplugged podcast. Nothing lights us up more than seeing businesses thrive, especially in uncertain times. We have 32 combined years of doing nothing but mentoring and training businesses from around the globe in order to increase their revenue and thrive in uncertain times. So what we would like to do is share with you a little bit about what we've discovered over the last 32 years.
We've created this amazing business model called the Forever Business Model, and we want to give it to you for free. All you need to do is jump down into the description below. There's a link there called Steal Our Forever Business Model. Click on the link. There's a 9-minute video that you can watch where we unpack everything you need to know to implement it in your business right away.
That's exactly it. I had this model of psychotherapy that I'd been trained in. I'm still a member of the Association of Psychotherapists, so maybe I'm a sort of recovering psychotherapist. And I had this model that people take a long time to change, and now it even says that behind me on the chart here that it's not changing that takes time; it's the not changing that actually is what takes people's time. Yeah,
100%. I remember Tad would always say, change happens in an instant. The motivation to change may take a long time, but the change happens in an instant. And when he said that, I was like, that's exactly right. Like when you decide to quit smoking, the decision is instant. Like the decision to start smoking is instant. When someone decides to start smoking, it's instant. When they decide to quit smoking, it's instant. Yet the lead up time is often the long term.
Yeah. And, a lot of the process of helping people change is focusing on that lead up, focusing on how do you build motivation? How do you get people to a state where they congruently want to do something different? And that is something that I picked up quite a bit of a understanding of from Tad James as well, by the way, just want to acknowledge.
Awesome. And so you maybe weren't the first person to bring NLP to New Zealand, but you've certainly been a pioneer of NLP in New Zealand.
I think that's fair.
You're the name that I keep hearing coming out from New Zealand in regards to NLP, and I've met a number of your graduates over the years as well. Yet you have this innate curiosity and interest and I guess purpose to work not just as a trainer of NLP, but most importantly, and this is where the value of NLP comes, the application of NLP. And you seem to have chosen a very challenging area to use these skills in, primarily in trauma. And way back in 2010, there was a series of earthquakes in Christchurch, which was horrendous and awful for Christchurch. And I met some graduates of yours who shared that you were on the front line. Maybe I don't know if you were on the front line, but you offered your services to work with the people who had been displaced and suffering trauma from that earthquake. Could you share a little bit about A, what motivated you to do that, and B, how you were able to apply NLP to help these I'm cautious of the word victim because I don't like to put people in the word victim, but people who had been displaced by the earthquake.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to have had a background by that time working in crisis areas overseas. So I'd worked in Bosnia Herzegovina. I trained in Sarajevo. which was the Bosnian Muslim kind of center, and in Pale, which was the Republika Srpska headquarters. So
Was this during the war? When it
was close enough to the war so that we had to be careful flying into the country so we weren't shot down. Yeah.
Oh.
And so I knew that NLP was robust enough to work with. So I was training psychiatrists at the hospital there, and I knew that what we had was robust enough to deal with those kind of crises. And that gave me the confidence once I started working these other areas with earthquakes, tsunami, these kind of, and other wars, the confidence that we could do things that would make real difference to people's lives. So in Christchurch, what we did was we made links with the government agencies that were funding counselling. We set up a 24-hour hotline so that people could call us up for NLP at any time of day or night. We could then apply for funding for all the people that we worked with from the government. We had, of course, we had what for most organizations working with people was a novel, efficient approach,
Yes.
like how to help people change quick. Yeah.
Being in the NLP industry for a long period of time, one of the challenges, one of the more difficult components is to get your foot in the door so you can capitalize and use the funding that the government gives to the different modalities and different associations or the different types of therapy. How were you able to get the government to go, this is needed right now, this is good?
Well, I know this sounds maybe a little almost trivializing it, but like people connections always win out over the logic of the thing. And so we were fortunate enough to have some connections, people who had trained in NLP, who were inside government agencies. And oddly enough, the link came through relationship services, which is like couples counseling.
Okay.
So it wasn't the most direct place. It was just where we had a connection, where we had a friend. And that was how everything happened for me, really. When I went over to Sarajevo the first time, it was because I had a friend who was working at the hospital there. And she said, look, all these psychiatrists have got PTSD. All of their clients have got PTSD. 90% of the city has got PTSD. And you know something that could work here. So will you do it? And so, it's a personal connection. Yeah.
Incredible. And you mean offline before we started, you also said that you're working with some people, you're training up. So you're literally training up coaches or therapists who are then going to Ukraine to work with people who are displaced with trauma.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So with Ukraine, we actually we train online. My wife Yulia Kurasheva and I, so she has sort of family connections into Ukraine. Again, personal connection is good. But we've been training. Sometimes we have a session where we've got a couple of thousand psychotherapists in Ukraine, and
several thousands. You're training NLP to several thousand psychotherapists in Ukraine.
And the situation is pretty dramatic. Like this week, for example, the power keeps going out for some of the people that we've got.
Cold. I heard on the news, like it's
freezing cold and no power. And sometimes the translator, I have a translator translating into Ukrainian or Russian, and the translator, often you can hear shells landing in the background or machine gun fire. It's a very dramatic situation. Yeah.
So many places we can go. Everyone's always interested in results. Could you share some of the results you had with the Christchurch earthquake recipients of NLP and the work you're doing now with the psychotherapists that are in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are just so many stories of results, and so that to give you an idea of the kind of processes that we're doing. We're doing the movie theatre trauma recovery process, which has been then kind of reorganized into RTM, the one that the main research in NLP has been done on. And we're also doing a version of the NLP eye movement process. So it was in this form that we're doing it was initially developed by Steve Andreas, and then enhanced work, of course, by work of people like Andrew Austin. And so we're doing these very efficient little processes, and we'll take someone who comes in to the tents there in Christchurch who is so much in a panic state that they're vomiting, that we need to have buckets.
Wow.
You have to plan for the real world of people who have just absolutely traumatized, and there'd be aftershocks happening as it's going on. And so then we get them to lie down, rest, bring their pulse down to a normal level, and then take them through the processes, and they would just walk out smiling, so it'd be absolutely
incredible,
dramatic. In Ukraine, we're working with a much vaster and more tragic situation, of course, and we have people who are, I'm working not only training the main psychotherapists and the main NLP people there, but also training people who work in the armed forces, and their job is, I would not like to do. They are working.
You're training the armed forces in Ukraine as well.
Yeah. So these are people who are the psychologists working inside the armed forces, and their job is often like someone just gets into them and they say, this guy's a mess. He's screaming and crying, and fix him up, and either so we can get him to go back into the war, or so he can go home and get the hell out of here. And so that's very tough on the psychologists as well. So again, a really strong, grounded understanding of how NLP works and of how trauma is healed. Or I'm cautious about using this word trauma. It has implications that are not NLP based, but I feel very confident about what I've been doing over this 40 years, of course, now. So, yeah.
We had Frank Puslik on the podcast last year. He's in Ukraine. Do you connect with him?
I have on a few occasions connected with him. Yeah, and of course he has the advantage of speaking Ukrainian and Russian, and he does amazing work there as well. And so he has been. That's right. He's been right on the ground there, and especially around Odessa, as all that's happening. So there are quite a few people. The RTM people have been working in there as well. So I'm not taking on Ukraine by myself or something.
No.
Yeah.
But there's so many times we hear how NLP would be so beneficial in so many dire situations around the world, and it's refreshing to talk to someone who is on the front line of actually putting NLP into the hands and the minds of the people who are on the front line in these places, and how much of a difference it is making. Because this is one of the visions that Callum and I have regarding the NLP industry, is that NLP has been around for 50 years now, and there's fresh wind to be blown into those sails, and it's people like yourself who are, I guess, paving the way for NLP to be accepted, and willingly accepted and recognized, etc., by other therapists and counselors. And part of our mission is to, sounds a little bit, it's fun, but it's to like make NLP cool again. And we've even got these T-shirts made up that say "Make NLP cool again." That we did it as a meme, as a joke, but people are saying, "No, I want one," and they're giving us their sizes for it. Anyway, I digress. Coming back to
that's really good. I want to just, before you do, Conor, I just want to acknowledge that. And one of the things I've seen you saying online, which I think is really cool, is about modeling and the importance of modeling in NLP. And I just want to acknowledge your wisdom and kind of going for that, because what I'm doing in these places with crises, with social crises, is actually modeled from people's resilience. So it's not just kind of theory, it's not just the NLP stuff that we just throw in there. It's based on modeling, like how do really resilient people come through things like this, and what of those things are out of our control, like their culture, and what things can we do with
we
NLP. So I think you're really doing something important, bringing.
We appreciate that. Cal and I we jumped on a Zoom with Robert Dilts. He ran a 50th anniversary, and
That's right.
one of the questions that he asked was, "What's next for NLP? You know, where is the NLP field going?" And he said, "Who are we going to model next?"
Mhm.
And it we took it and ran with it, and it's like most people are modeling within the NLP industry, but we need to think broader than that.
Yeah.
And what you just said there with with the resilience, etc., that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the heart. It's not just the techniques that
Yeah.
sell NLP. It's the physical application of it. You need to learn the foundational tools. But it's like a chosen discipline using the foundational tools of NLP, and that's what's going to drive NLP into the future. Beyond the surface structure of just learning the 16 techniques or however many there are at Prac and 16 at Master Prac, for example, depending on what curriculum you use, it's much deeper than that, and that's where we want to influence trainers and the industry to go.
Yeah.
In that space. Tell me a little bit about resilience. Cal and I love resilience. I'm a resilience and grit I find fascinating, because you could have someone who breaks a nail and has an absolute meltdown, or you could have someone who is abused for the first 6 years of their life, who just sort of get through life and they've grown resilient as a result of it. My personal curiosity, could you share some insights on that?
Yeah. So, one of the key things that we know about resilience, and this linked into what I started off training even before I was doing NLP, is about relationships. So, the quality of people's relationships sort of overrides everything else in terms of their ability to be resilient in a crisis. And
Relationships with others or themselves or all?
with to others, first of all. And so that means that human beings are not meant to be kind of isolated, like, tough by myself sort of thing. We're meant to look after each other. And so, when we actually check that, that means that people from different cultural backgrounds respond differently because of their different attitudes towards mutual support and so on. And it's a caution because, you and I come from probably from fairly individualistic cultural backgrounds where it's like each person by themselves. That's not entirely what makes people resilient. And it means that when I come into one of these areas where there's been a crisis, I need to be careful not to break their most powerful natural way of being resilient, which is the links they have with their family and with their friends. So by giving them the idea that I'm some expert from outside who has some magic, I would break the very thing that they need most of all, which is the sense that they're loved and that they have others that they love. So that's the first thing I'm doing when I'm talking to people in Ukraine. Every single time I make a point of saying, listen, I'm talking to you from the other side of the world. I love you. And, I'm another human being. And just seeing someone saying that to them, hearing and seeing that's the most healing thing in the world. And we have the research to back that up. So that's before I start. Of course, there are things about how you think, what questions you're asking yourself. Those are really, really important things. And people who are resilient ask useful questions about what can I do? They don't keep asking, what if bad things happen? Why did this happen to me? Stuff that focuses on the things that have gone wrong. So we can teach people those skills, and we can do processes that help them heal previous things. And the sense of connection is really the thing that's behind it all.
So the sense of connection, it just gives them like that inner ability to continue focusing that things can get better.
Yeah. At the cellular level, I know this sounds almost pseudoscientific, but trust me, I'm a nurse. At the cellular level, people respond to the sense that someone else cares about them, and they respond when they care about someone else. So one of the things that if you talk to people who've been in a crisis situation, people used to say this about the Second World War, that suddenly everyone came together and they all were looking after each other. And one amazing thing came out of that, and they felt like they were part of a community again. And so that's that's something that I've really.
We heard that after 9/11, I think everyone said New York became like a community again.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's really important. And NLP our NLP skills should enhance that rather than suggesting, oh, that doesn't matter, we'll just do some magic.
Sure.
Yeah.
So do you have it, like, is this what you teach in your NLP trainings? Do you have separate trainings for this? If someone wanted to learn more about this, could they reach out to you and
Yeah, they could. In various places around the world and online, of course, as well. Yeah, so we teach trainings in communication skills, how to create loving relationships. We teach trainings in resilience, how to and by the way, not just in the Western world here as well. Like we do trainings each year in Egypt, for example, and we train people who are already working in Gaza online and getting ready to go across the border again. Palestinian people. So we train people across that Middle Eastern area, of course. We've done trainings into Lebanon and I've taught into Israel as well. So we do those trainings in all these places where
at the end of the podcast, we'll give you a website and where people can reach out to you. But I think it's great that you're teaching this so that others. Do you have to be NLP trained in order to learn this, or could I be a counselor, or could I be just curious?
Yeah. So to do the resilience training, we let anyone into that training, and the more NLP you have, then the more effective you're going to be with it.
Okay.
Like you and I share so many presuppositions in the background that make this work. And when I'm training, it's not just new people. It's when I'm training people who have that traditional psychotherapy background that I was talking about. That's where I had the most challenge of getting them to shift their way of thinking about this. And that's why even the idea that it's trauma is it carries baggage with it, because actually for your brain, it's not that everything was nice and then there's trauma. Your brain is constantly readjusting each day. And it doesn't think of it as trauma. It thinks of it as, okay, what's the best thing I can do right now? What resources have I got? Like physically in the brain, what resources have I got? What can I do best with these resources today? That's how your brain thinks. It thinks like an NLP practitioner, not like a psychotherapist.
It's interesting, isn't it? My wife, Amanda, she's a NLP coach, hypnotherapist, counselor down here in Bateman's Bay. And she's very, very busy, gets a lot of referrals. She gets a lot of results. And there are other sort of mums at the school who are psychologists. And they said there was like, oh, things are really busy at the moment. Some of these cases can take years. And then in Mandy's head, she's like, what are you doing? How can it take years? It's so fascinating that she'll often get like they've done this, and now I'll try this. Yeah. And so often it's the last person that is on the list, but it's also the last person that they have to see.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's one of the beautiful things about NLP is that it is rapid change, and you literally change the trajectory of someone's life very, very quickly.
That's right. Yeah.
And then they're on a brand new life. This is one of the reasons why I'm sure you've been in this industry for a long time. I've been in this industry, so has Cal, is that we just love seeing the journey that people take after they've had a session. We could obviously talk NLP all day about the sessions. I am curious I've got a question here from Saliha. When you train people in places like Gaza, Lebanon, or Egypt, what do you notice about resilience that's different or surprisingly universal?
Okay.
Good question.
That's a really good question. Okay. So every place I go in to teach, and I teach in several continents each year and a lot of different cultures. And I'm always looking for exactly the answer to that question. Like, what are these people really good at? Now, one of the things in that area in the Middle East that people get a lot of flack for, but that I notice as a kind of a strength, is their sense of spirituality. So people bring spirituality into their, they expect to spend like 5 times a day they do prayer, for example. Like, you know, I mean, ask any Westerner, you know, how would you possibly find 5 times a day that you could focus on spirituality? But they do. And as we're talking, as I'm training them, they're constantly relating it to like, how does this relate to the bigger picture? And I come from a very different way of thinking about spirituality to them, but I really admire this. And that is a key part of resilience as well, is having a big picture. So we know when people are traumatized, they are, to use the NLP term, they're anchored into the most profoundly disturbing points in the story of what happened to them. And people who are more resilient actually see that as part of a larger story. So they say, yeah, bad things happened and then I survived, and that will be the way life is. So that's actually another secret to resilience that these people in the Middle East already have. And in a way, you know, that connection to spirituality, I see that in to take a very different culture in Japan as well. Japan, in the research, is one of the most resilient cultures in the world. Have an earthquake, have thousands of people wiped out. The next day they're building the roads, and by next week the road will be functioning again. And part of how they do that is they do have this sense, well, like life is one big story, and suffering is just, you know, we don't have to think, oh, everything's ruined because something bad happened. We just get on with life. And so that, I know it sounds brutal, but
no, that's actually giving me goosebumps. I felt the hair on my neck stand up, because it's almost like they have an innate ability to step back and see the bigger picture, and sort of go, it's going to be okay.
And that's why it was so hard for the drug companies to sell antidepressant drugs in Japan, by the way. They had to invent no one believed they had depression. So they had to invent a whole new word to explain what antidepressant drugs were to treat.
That's hilarious. So there was no word for depression in...
No, because it's a fundamental idea in Buddhism that life brings suffering, but suffering is caused by wanting things that you don't actually, that aren't manifesting in your life right now. You know, so like happiness comes from gratitude, from appreciating what you have. So that's so fundamental to the Buddhist way of thinking that it doesn't even make sense to think what is depression. You know, it's like
why do we just how can you label something that you don't know that you have?
That's right. And so we have, you know, it's in the same way as, for example,
that's an interesting question. Was it there, but it just wasn't labeled? And then now that it was labeled, all of a sudden everyone has it?
Companies want them to think, right?
Right. Yeah.
Take another example is like schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is something that, a name that comes from the West, and people are diagnosed the same way for schizophrenia in all these places around the world. So speaking now as a psychiatric nurse, I know it's a very unpleasant thing for someone to have diagnosed. And in the West, of course, when they're diagnosed with it, that's pretty much their life. They're told that, you know, well, this has been going on for more than 6 months, so it's probably going to go on the rest of their life. Now, if we look in India, we see that within 2 years, 50% of people diagnosed schizophrenic will no longer be diagnosable. If we look in Nigeria, 58% will no longer be diagnosable in 2 years. If we look in somewhere like Denmark, and this is the World Health Organization research, we look in somewhere like Denmark, and the number who'll be out in 2 years is something like 8%. So it's just...
What's the difference in Nigeria and...
spirituality.
Pardon?
Yeah, so spirituality. So in Nigeria and in India, when people have these conditions, the community way of understanding it, firstly, there's community support for them, rather than sort of locking them away somewhere else.
Yeah, in a
well, this is a spiritual crisis. This person is struggling with the big issues about what's the meaning of life and how do I connect with the universe. And that approach, it turns out that in that particular condition, it works better than thinking that this is a medical thing that needs a certain treatment.
So do you feel, is there a correlation? Because in the Western English-speaking world, faith was much more prominent 50 years ago, the church, Christian, Anglican, Catholic. And there's been quite a stark move away from the church. And I guess looking at the bar graphs or the the bell curves, there's been an increase in every sort of diagnostic that you can think of in the last 50 years as well.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, there's a conservative move back to the church in some ways recently. Is there a pattern here, or am I
Okay? Well, I
going
think
down a rabbit hole?
Yeah, I know that's good. I think there were good reasons why people moved away from the church, because I think that our spirituality hadn't kept up with our technology and so on, and
Spirituality hadn't kept up with our technology.
yeah, so our way of understanding spirituality had not kept up with our technology. But I think that what we've done is thrown the baby out.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Okay, well, let me give you an example. So one of the pieces of research I've done. So I mentioned before we started that I'm currently doing a master's degree in history. So I have training as a historian and archaeologist. And so what we did in Cyprus, one of the places where we have a home and we teach each year, we run a course on NLP and spirituality. And what we did was we modeled what happened in the ancient cult of Aphrodite there. So Aphrodite is goddess of love, and her followers would do certain things. So they would do things that look very much like modern Qigong exercises, traditional Chinese movement exercises, things like that, dancing, trance work. So things that we knew how to do. So with university supervision, we set up a research project where we recreated this cult experience for a week, and we do it each year now. And so people come into this experience, and then we actually assess them using a reliable scale. How profound is their experience? Their experience is comparable to the experience when someone takes psilocybin. So when someone takes a psychedelic drug. And so that's basically using NLP over a week. We can shift people into a state which is comparable to a psilocybin experience of oneness with everything and so on. And those kinds of experiences, I believe we need new neuroscience-based ways of explaining to people. And I think that's happening in the psychiatry field with psilocybin as well. We need ways of explaining to people so that they can make sense in the scientific world, in the modern world. Because if we don't, we leave people without any meaning, without any sense of connection to life.
Fascinating. I've never looked at it that way. So for the viewers, asking for a friend, the difference between NLP and neuroscience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, NLP is applied neuroscience. It's as simple as that. But the application was developed before the neuroscience to explain how it was happening. That's how I usually explain it to people. So over the last couple of decades, we have got the neuroscience to explain all the things that are happening in NLP. So when I have neuroscientists at my training, they're just so excited. It's like, oh man, this is.
So we have the NLP camp. We're like, these techniques work, but we're not exactly sure how. You have the neuroscience that say, in theory, you can do this. And then everyone's like, hang on, you're the other half of you complete me.
That's it. And I feel like I'm really lucky to have this background in both these fields, so that because I think that's what we're in the process of doing. And that's what I think the NLP research and recognition organization, which just a plug for that's people like Rick Gray and Frank Bork and Connie Andras and I.
We had Connie Ray on the podcast like 2 months ago. Fascinating.
Well, you know how she's doing research for her wholeness process and for core transformation. And that's essentially the same thing that we were doing in Cyprus there with similar stuff. Yeah.
So you've been in the NLP field for 40 plus years. Can you share a bit of a snapshot then and now? Is it the same? Have we forgotten anything? Could you sort of have a bit of a snapshot?
Yes, it's changed in all sorts of ways. But one of the most inspiring things for me is to see things like what you're doing here, which is reconnecting the NLP world. Yes. And so we have this. It's a big advantage in NLP that we say, well, the map is not the territory, so my NLP doesn't have to be the same as your NLP. So we fragment and divide But it's also an advantage in NLP that we can then synthesize and model each other and bring those things back together. And that, I think, has really happened over the last 40 years, that there's more connections across the different parts of the community. So I think that's a really cool thing. One of the things that was really valuable, I think, in very early NLP was the extremism, the kind of semi-insanity of people like Richard Bandler, who were able to just say such outrageous things and not care a damn about what people felt about that. And sometimes I think it's good to get a re-injection of that stuff, so that craziness, because, for example, we have new, what NLP would call new nominalizations that emerge. So I'll give you an example. One that's emerged in the last couple of years is neurodivergent. Now,
Yes.
Neurodivergent is a really cool word because it means that we're saying these people are not sick, they are just different.
Yep.
The risk of it is that it says that now they are in a box. So now that here's a new way they can say, oh, well, you see, I can't do that because I'm neurodivergent.
And it then becomes a part of their badge, part of their identity, right?
And then that identity level self-restriction then stops them making the changes that they want to make. And we need to, I think the way out of that is to go back to the kind of things that Richard Bandler did when he was talking about ADHD way back in the 1970s, 1980s, and just say, but that's ridiculous. Like it's just something you do in your head. And if you do one thing, you can learn to do another. And sure, it's harder for some people than others until they get practice with it, but you can change.
So it's almost, would you say, just because my nickname is Metaphor Man, I love seeing similarities. If someone is genetically built a certain way, they will find it more difficult to lose weight. Whereas some people can eat like horses and they don't even put on any weight. And that's just, they're the cards you've been dealt with. And it's not necessarily good, bad, or indifferent. It's just that the person who may find it harder to lose weight probably has a higher skill set in another area of their life that the person who can eat all they want and not put on any weight maybe not has that. It could be their ability to intellectualize things, as an example.
It's a perfect metaphor, I think. And what it's telling you is that it's still useful for whatever the person's cards that they dealt with. It's still useful for them to learn how to play the game. And how you play the game of getting slim still works for people who have a genetic challenge with it.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's, and by the way, nowadays we're talking not just about genetic challenge in the sense of the genes themselves, but epigenetics. So a lot of my work is with different cultures. And so, we have this huge, well, maybe people listening won't know, we have this huge amount of research in the last few years, which first of all shows that we can analyze someone's epigenetics, the information around the genes.
Epigenetics is what for the viewers?
It's around the genes. So the genes sort of tell your body which proteins to make, for example, like adrenaline, which hypes you up and things like that, or serotonin, or all these proteins that you've heard fancy names for. And so then there's information around those that's called epigenetic information, and that can be added during your lifetime. And it will say, don't do this one as much because the world is too dangerous. So don't make them relax, or something like that. Now that epigenetic information is so predictable that we can look at people who are the descendants of people who were in the Nazi concentration camps, and we can differentiate them from Jewish people in the same family who do not have ancestry from the camps. So the concentration camps produce a certain kind of epigenetic change that is passed on to their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and makes them more hyper-aroused for protection. You can call it trauma, but it's pretty sensible, really, Now,
So
the second thing, that's the first shocking thing. But the second thing I'm going to say before we even talk about it more is that we also have at least 3 research studies where we do something like an NLP process and we check their epigenetics afterwards, and it's gone. Precisely. Every cell in their body, the epigenetic information has changed as a result of something that took half an hour. That's good, right?
It's incredible. I love I'll say introduction, but you've been doing it since day one. But the way you bring science into it, because for most people out there, when you say here's something that will change you very quickly, they'll say, where's the science behind it? Science seems to be the go-to
Yeah.
when there's ever any doubt. And, and that's another conversation about people, what sort of science do we trust? And but I love but if you, so you hook up someone, like, do you take a blood test or do you hook them up with a scanner? How does
You can do blood tests, and you can even check their saliva will have cells in it. So you just test, you choose which cells you're going to test, you test those cells. Blood cells change very quickly, so they're easy to check. And so you can find, like, it's not just that in general epigenetics have changed, but this specific block on this specific gene on this specific chromosome will have changed. It's that exact.
It's in two things. Is this generational trauma? Is that parallel to what we're talking about here?
That's what we're on about. So it's collective trauma. It's the stuff that people like Thomas Hubel are talking about, and we have a process called transcendence that's designed for this. I got into this field because, when you're working with trauma, after a while it starts to feel like I was the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, because how come these armies and politicians are throwing people off the cliff and I'm at the bottom, they're catching them and fixing them up? Why don't we deal with changing the society as a whole?
Preventative.
That society is made up of human beings, so we can actually change cross-generational trauma. We can change collective trauma inside the body like this.
So it's interesting you say about the swab. So recently, my wonderful wife is far more advanced in this field than I am, but I took a swab. We sent it to the UK. They came back and gave me a rundown because my mother had breast cancer. My dad passed because prostate cancer had metastasized.
Right.
And so it's, been genetically. So we did a swab, went to the UK, came back, and it's sort of given me a whole rundown of different supplements and things like that my body needs in order to make sure that I live a long and healthy life.
Yeah.
Are you saying, and am I on the right page, that sort of swab, you find out what their genetic makeup is, and with the processes that you're talking about, you can actually change the epigenetics of it.
Yeah. So it's that probably when they investigated that swab, they just get the raw genetic data. The epigenetics, we need other tests to find, but it's the same sort of thing. That's right. So we're not there yet, but we're moving towards a place where we could test people, find out their epigenetic setup, tell them, if you do this NLP process, eye movement process or whatever it is, we can predict that tomorrow you will have different epigenetics and you'll live longer, and this won't hyper arouse you like it has.
That's great. I read something about this or heard about it. I'm half Irish. My dad was born and bred in Ireland, and there was a potato famine many years ago in Ireland, and I think some studies had been done around the potato famine.
Yep.
And some sort of genetic makeup that they're susceptible to something, and it stems back from the potato famine. And now I don't have the clear story. It was sort of probably read it as I was going to bed. And what you're talking about now is starting to make more sense with that.
That's exactly what it is. So when I've run this transcendence process, was developed by my wife, Yulia Kurasheva, just to acknowledge where the precision of the process. Yes. And she developed this process. So we've done it with hundreds of people, and I was doing it at an ANLP conference through Britain, and I had reports back from people. So what we do is we take people, how a lot of NLP processes like timeline therapy, we go back to childhood and so on. And so in this process, we go back to their collective inheritance rather than just their timeline. And so we start off with people who they don't think it has a collective origin at all. But an example from what you gave there was a woman who said the issue that she started working with in my workshop online was overeating. So so then she does this process and she suddenly realizes my great-grandparents were part of that famine, Ireland. And of course, they gave instructions genetically to their kids, epigenetically, to overeat because that's life. And that's a really important reframe of that idea of trauma. I really believe that these epigenetic instructions, these are not traumatic damage. These are love from our ancestors. Our ancestors only have one way they can communicate with us and keep us alive, and that is this epigenetic information. And what it prioritizes above everything else is, here's how you stay alive. And if we're in a safe place now where we don't need to eat, or we don't need to fight everyone who comes to the door, then we can heal that. But we don't have to be angry at them for this beautiful information that they sent us.
Yeah. There's a study with, I think, like animals who learn quickly, because animals have such a shorter life cycle than us. They learn, and it gets passed down the generations much quicker, and then they learn to walk a certain track within 2 generations because they've just been wired that way. In a way, are we coming back to like a bird, a albatross can just know, or a pigeon knows where to fly back to where it needs to fly back, and it's at, and I'm not even going to say unconscious level. It's just at our genetic level.
Yeah, so that's right, and this means that rejoining our collective experience. And, that thing I said about resilience, that resilience is most of all, the most important thing I could tell you about being resilient is make connections with other human beings. We don't exist as separate individuals. We exist as part of this community of humanity. And the more we love and care for each other, then the more each of us can flourish.
I mean, that's why they... in prison, the worst thing that can happen is you're in the hole for 30 days by yourself.
Yeah.
That's punishment.
That's it.
That's punishment in the place where you're punished. The worst thing that could happen in a place that is already terrible is that you're alone.
Yeah.
That's probably why society had a hard time after COVID, because there was a lot of isolation.
COVID was a very, very traumatic thing for the world because of this, because it's the fragmentation of world community. Yeah.
So we're going to jump tracks a little bit. This is a question Cal and I often like to ask, and I think you are a perfect candidate to receive it. There's 2. The first one is, where is giving up versus letting go? So if you want something in life, and you're convincing yourself that it's part of the journey because I want it, and these challenges that I'm up against, because Cal and I see it all the time. People who are ultra capable of doing and have huge potential give up because it's too hard, or they don't get up that one more time that will actually be the difference that makes the difference. So where's that line between giving up on something and just letting it go?
Well, I'm going to sort of give a glib answer to where the line is. I do want to acknowledge that this question is incredibly important. And the question is about, another way of framing it in terms of the work I do with resilience is can you be too resilient? And I think the answer is yes. In Japan, Japanese culture is pretty close to the edge of that. So in Japanese culture, as I say, after the tsunami and the earthquake in Japan, we trained people to go into that area, and people would be out the next day helping each other, and that's beautiful, and they'd be rebuilding the roads and things like that. And it's kind of beautiful.
Very honorable.
But they would have done that even if they were going to die. Even if Fukushima was melting down around them, they would be out there, and they would just be determined to reach those goals of looking after each other and so on. And in a sense, so that at the other end of the continuum are the Americans, who immediately declared an 80-mile area around Fukushima where no one was allowed to go from the American community there. And they started getting ready to evacuate Tokyo. So that is the opposite extreme. You see, that's the kind of like extreme unresilient, like I'll give up, I'll drop it. And somewhere in there does need to be a line though, because too resilient is
it could be detrimental. So what?
Yeah.
And then if you keep doing something because you're telling yourself that you're resilient,
yeah,
and it hurts you on an emotional level,
That's it.
spiritual level, physical level sometimes. So the coping mechanism, one would think, is to disassociate so that you keep doing something that isn't good for you. So you disassociate from how you feel because
Yeah.
you feel like you have to do it,
Yeah.
versus acknowledging this is just not for me.
yeah. And so I think that being able to constantly ask yourself that question, like, what is it I want from this, which is, of course, a core NLP question, and that's really how we find the answer. So I don't want to give a simple answer to what is the answer, but I think asking that question is spot on. And you can be too resilient in that sense, and you can, of course, be too just giving up on things. And
I mean, and that's
yeah,
we coach businesses all the time, and the ones that last are the ones that are resilient, and the ones that don't last are like rudderless ships that as soon as a big wave comes, they go, oh well, I guess I was meant to go this way, and it's like a jellyfish in the ocean where you just sort of go with the currents, and
that's
and
it. It's only dead fish that go with the flow. Yeah,
yeah, I like that. It's only dead fish that go with the flow. So where it's very hard. Where is that line, and when is enough?
and the people you're talking to, if you're talking to people like me who've been in this NLP field for 40 years, then clearly they, if they err on that side of being more resilient, because there's a famous, like I teach traditional Chinese exercise and traditional Chinese spirituality. And one of the famous sayings in China is, the master always makes the same choice. Now that sounds very boring, but what it means is that how you get to be a master at something is you keep doing it for quite a while. And we have lots of NLP practitioners who they want to go out there and they want to work with people. And so they decorate their office, they feng shui everything, they do it all nice, and then they wait and nothing happens. And a month later they think, I'm going to give up on this, and like,
that's right.
Always makes the same choice. You actually got to stick at this for quite a while for this to work. And you got to have a plan to sustain yourself over what are the challenges of beginning a business. That's
two quotes came to mind. I think it was a Bruce Lee one. Don't fear the man who knows 1,000 kicks, fear the man that's done the same kick 1,000 times. And, and another one is by Grant Cardone. He's a big personality, but I like his go get 'em attitude, and go the extra mile. There's no one on it. And I that sort of rings true. So I really appreciate your answer on that one, because it's a gray area and there's no set formula, but we're always interested as to what my great minds who have been in this field for a long time, how they view that, because I think it is, or what the scenario you just mentioned, we get, I've gotten for 22 years. Hey, I've put my A-frame outside of my office. And people aren't coming into my office, and I don't know if what do I do? Do I keep going? And do I really like this? And then the next shiny thing comes along, and someone says, "Oh, you can be more successful easier over here," and they go, "Oh," and they go that way, and then it's like a pinball machine going from one side to the other, trying to get to their destination. And the other one, which is a bit of a deeper one. And I think you like this one actually, because you have a strong spiritual background with what you teach. Free will versus fate.
Now we're really asking some big questions.
We often ask that one at the beginning when we know we have time. But I was so interested in the trauma work that you do with NLP that I wanted to go there first. But free will versus fate, because you studied like a number of different spiritual teachings with your NLP, 40 years in the NLP field. You've seen, you've experienced, you've taught so much. What's your feeling, thoughts?
Okay, well, the best way to answer it is to tell a really simple story about it, which is that this was the question that preoccupied William James. So William James was the guy who developed the submodality list. This is in 1890. Tad always used to talk about it, so eventually I read his books. The first book ever called Psychology. It was by this American professor, William James. And William James himself was, he had a heart condition. He was chronically depressed, and he was struggling with this philosophical issue. Is there free will, or is everything predestined? Like it's like clockwork and we're stuck with what we get. And he noticed after a while that when he assumed that there was free will, he felt happy. And when he assumed the opposite, he felt depressed. And so he decided it doesn't matter what the theory is. And he then adopted this philosophical approach, which he called pragmatism. And that is, I think, a fundamental NLP approach, which is like what works is what works and not what you think is theoretically true. So he decided that he was just going to assume that he has free will, even knowing that maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. It's just a more useful presupposition.
That's a great answer, actually, and one easily adoptable and adaptable to everyone's life. So essentially, what you think is right, and if you choose that you have free will, then you're going to be probably more empowered. So you may as well do that.
Yeah. Now that doesn't say that it's true.
Correct.
It just means that it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not if you know that this is what makes us happy.
A lot of our fears are constructed up here in our head. I remember Steve Hansen, Sir Steve Hansen, when he was coaching the All Blacks, he said, worry is a waste of an emotion.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, the part of your brain where you experience yourself as having free will, as making choices, making decisions, is directly where you were just pointing them, by the way, in the frontal cortex up here. And that is actually a measure of happiness. If we compare the activity in the frontal cortex, specifically up here, with the activity in the amygdala, the kind of arousal center, the ratio between them is a precise measure of how happy someone will score themselves. Now, when they first discovered this from the research, then they looked down their database and they find in Europe, they had one person who was an outlier in terms of that ratio. So he had much more activity up here, much less activity in this amygdala. So they contact him and find out who he is. And that was this guy, Mathieu Ricard. So if you do an online search, you'll see, instead of searching for that name, search for the happiest man in Europe. And that's what will come up. So basically, then they want to know, so what are you doing, Matthew? And he's a guy from Belgium, and he had a couple of jobs. One was he worked as a translator for the Dalai Lama, and he's written books about this. You may have come across this stuff. And the other thing is he spends 6 hours a day doing a meditation called compassion meditation, where he sends love and gratitude to all living beings. It's a hell of a job, but someone's got to do it, I guess. So, that was his job. And it turns out that makes you happy, because it doesn't matter whether people treat him nice or people treat him like shit. He still sends love and compassion to all living beings every day. So he's totally in charge of it. And that feeling of being in charge is happiness.
So would that grow his, grow is a right word?
It strengthens it. Yeah.
So, and this is like when we have alcohol or drugs, does that sort of temporarily inflate that area?
When we scan the people's brains who've been doing that for a long time, then they have very diminished activity up there. It's a fragile area of the brain in the sense that it's a new development. You can see monkeys don't have it as much as we do.
Yes.
And it's, of course, what this means is that a person who has used a lot of drugs has developed a short circuit away from that. And they're responding more to their amygdala than to up here. That's a key thing in resilience training. And then we come back to that thing with the person who's born with a tendency towards obesity. It's going to be harder for a person who has practiced giving up on things to build this neurological muscle. But it's still the same principle works. It's still the same thing works as feeling like you're in charge of your life actually creates happiness. And it creates happiness partially by feeling like if I'm in charge of my emotions, then I can feel love and gratitude whenever I like.
Choose to feel love and gratitude.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes getting out of bed is hard in the morning.
That's right.
But we do it.
That's right.
Discipline. There's a quote I love. Discipline beats talent 10 out of 10 times if you can show up. And I guess this comes back to the master quote that you had.
Always makes the same choice. Yep.
Gosh. So Richard, I feel I could sit here and pick your brain for another 3 hours, particularly on the clinical approach and the clinical applications of NLP. There are a lot of viewers here who are NLP coaches, NLP trainers. They use NLP with their clients and themselves and their families. And I know that they would love to bring in more clinical studies of NLP. And I said this offline, I think, when I used to sell a lot of NLP trainings, I used to send people to your website and say, if you want to understand and get some clinical studies that have been done with NLP, go to Richard Bolstad's website. He's got hundreds of them. So anyone listening now, I would highly recommend, I'm going to plug you now, Richard. I highly recommend, what's your website?
It's, if you want to put www, but any of those origins, and then transformations with an S, .org, org.nz or NZ.
Transformations.org.nz. Okay. I'm just going to put it in the Facebook chat now. I've just put it in there now. And if you would like to learn everything you spoke about today, do you teach?
Yep, we teach. So it's there in the articles, it's there in downloadable videos. It's and you can see the connections to when the next trainings are.
Awesome.
True.
So if you would like some clinical approach to NLP, and not just a clinical approach in theory, someone who's actually on the front line working with the hotspots in the world right now where atrocities are happening in Ukraine, in the Middle East. You've worked on the front line with the people who were displaced during the earthquake, and Sarajevo and Yugoslavia before or after it was split up. You've literally been in the trenches and you've used NLP in all of these scenarios. And I'd probably say you're the only one in the world who has done this. And I've just realized this now. So on behalf of Cal and myself, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. And yes, Cal and I are on a big push to make NLP cool again. And so a shameless plug, we're getting these, it was a joke about making these t-shirts made up. Have a look on our Facebook pages. We're getting these t-shirts made up. We're actually going to do it. So if you want one, we won't make any money on it. But there will be a small fee. So I don't know, $20 or $30 plus postage. And go there, let us know your size, and we'll contact you when we're ready for the order. But if you are a trainer, coach, practitioner, therapist, and you want to upskill yourself in a very, very clinical and effective way, not just theory, from someone who's done it, go to transformations.org.nz. Richard, absolute pleasure to have you on the Unplugged podcast number 70 on behalf of myself and Callum.
Thank you very much, Connor.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching the Unplugged podcast with Callum and Conor from Connekt Coaching. Hope you loved this guest this week as much as we did. Cal?
What we wanted to remind you of is that if you wanted to steal our forever business model, which is perfect for all sorts of businesses around the world, to start to build extra revenue in your business right away, get instant access by clicking on the description and going into the link below, watching the 9-minute video where we unpack everything. See you next time.